Yeah.
So, how did your rhetorical analysis paper go? You good? Not so much?
I get lost. I'm just like trying not to just rewrite the paper.
Yeah. Did you come up with a good rhetorical claim about its logos or pathos or ethos?
Yeah, but I don't know how to kind of fit it all in.
Yeah. Well, we'll kind of talk about that a little bit, because the first thing we're going to do is go over rhetorical analysis paper number 2, in case you didn't get the perfect 25 score on this one, which, I mean, don't be too encouraged by your perfect scores on all your chapter reviews, writing history. Those are, like, you basically do the work, you got the points. So, in other words, might as well start on rhetorical analysis 2, just in case you need to. So here's it's similar to rhetorical analysis 1 in all except for one way. And we'll go over a lot of that one way today. But the similarities are, you get one rhetorical claim. Somebody define that for me. What's a rhetorical claim? What makes it rhetorical?
Well, rhetorical is like the art of communication. And so a rhetorical claim would be something like you're making a statement or a assumption about some form of communication.
Yeah, you're getting at it. I'm going to use your word, in fact, the art of it, and you're going to critique. You're going to evaluate or judge or something. You're going to say, oh, they did this really well. And the main way to one of the main ways to make sure you're doing a rhetorical claim is it about the content or the topic? Are you saying, oh yeah, gun control is great. Oh yeah, brushing your teeth is definitely a good idea. Okay, that's talking about the subject itself, not the way it was presented. So I write presentation here too.
Not what they did, but how they did it.
Yeah, all right, how to. And that's all, no more words to find. Okay, so you're talk about how they did it. So they can, and for rhetorical analysis number 1, that was going to be some claim about its logos or pathos or ethos. So you could say it was logical, the arguments were well supported, it was well organized, they used words I could follow. So this is kind of talking about the content, but it's not talking about the content itself. It's talking about the way the content was presented. It was clear, it was good. So basically, this claim that you make here, it could apply, you could say the exact same thing about any other paper or article that was written in a similar fashion. Whereas if you're talking about the content, I like the part about laser beams and how you should stare right into them, Can you apply that to another article that was written similarly? No, it'd have to be on the same content. So, presentation, not content. If you're talking about the pathos, you could say it was interesting, it was boring, it was confusing, it was deep, it was engaging, it was motivating. Yeah, what else can we say for pathos?
Confusing.
Good. What'd you say? Effective. Yeah, and effective. I'm going to write that word up here, so I lied. There's one more word. This is like the core question of rhetoric. Was it effective? Did it work or did it not? How well did it work? This part worked great, this part didn't work so well. Keeping the audience, the purpose and audience in mind, of course. Did what work? Well, what are they trying to do? Educate you? Great, that's the purpose. Did they do it? Yeah. Did it, or not. And with the audience, they were trying to educate doctors. Well, it worked great for them, but it would fail for third graders. So there's your evaluation. Was it effective? That's how you know if they did a good job or not. Did it work? Did they accomplish their purpose? What about for ethos? What are some?
So like an author,
Yeah.
like credentials or.
Yeah. Trustworthy.
Or,
Likable.
yeah.
They seem like a nice person. And how does that influence the way you read a paper? Like if someone, let's say two people are really smart. There's Brian and there's Tom. And Brian is brilliant. He knows stuff. He likes to do geometry and calculus puzzles, Well, Tom's over there doing his Sudoku, is that how you say it? Sudoku, on the subway. Brian is figuring out quantum mechanics and how much younger he is because he travels 6 stops on the red line every day at a little greater speed than, whatever the case may be. So Brian's really smart, but he comes off like this. Listen up, idiots. You're not going to understand anything I say, but you better take notes because it's the only way you'll get an A in my class. So he's a jerk. He knows what he's talking about. He gives good facts, but you hate him. Okay, versus Tom saying, all right, nobody really understands this, but let me make it as clear as everyone else gets it. A little more personable, a little more class or, humility, whatever. So when you're listening to Brian and Tom teach, how does Tom's hubris and ego, how does that influence the way you receive the message? Does it make you learn less?
Probably.
It could, right? Because you're like, what a jerk. I hate this guy. You're paying it distracts you, right? Whereas Tom, he's kind of casual and telling jokes. How does that influence the way you?
It's more engaging, so you're probably getting more actually getting the conversation rather than having a conversation in your own head about how much you hate.
Right. Less distraction, more engaged. Well put. And if you're having a good time, if you're happy, guess what? Dopamine in your brain, which means you learn better too. So there are all kinds of reasons why this little example could work better. Now, if Tom's just a goof off, you're like, he just said that, but is that a joke? Or, if you can't tell, that's a problem. So you can go too far to either side. But see, so ethos can influence readers of your articles and make you enjoy it more and say, oh, this person seems smart. I'm going to quit worrying about whether I trust him or not, or her. You just put that aside and soak up the facts. You're like, and you can be impressed, like, wow, this person really knows their stuff. Versus someone who's like, I think I get it. I think the author gets it. I'm not really sure. So all these things, these logos, pathos, ethos, they all influence the way you, as a reader, respond, whether you're the actual intended audience or not, right? So ideally, I'd say critique the article according to the intended audience, because we can't hold authors accountable to write something that everyone's gonna like. Maybe Dr. Seuss or something, I don't know. But anyway, so does that help, Lane? Does that add any clarity? Oh yeah, okay, good. So on rhetorical analysis number 2, you'll do the exact same thing, but this time you will not do logos or pathos or ethos. We're gonna do some more specific aspects of the paper, and they're certainly related to logos, pathos, and ethos. And here they are. You can tell what the purpose of the article was, and then you have to prove why you think that. So what's the purpose? Prove it. And then when you evaluate, tell me, did they succeed at accomplishing that purpose? The purpose was to reveal the findings of this research study they did and convince us that it was valid. Did it work? Yeah, they used tables, and they explained their methods, and they showed they weren't too biased on one side or the other. It worked. Or it didn't. Their purpose was to convey this information. I could not understand what they were talking about. Huge paragraphs, huge, even bigger words. Just kidding, that's impossible. So there's choice A. You could also analyze the audience. So who was it? Prove that to me, why you think that was the audience. And again, were they successful in reaching that audience? Did they appeal to that audience? So what are some ways, how do you know who the audience of an academic article could be? We'll practice all this in a minute, but how do you tell?
Well, the book it was saying stuff about just like paying attention to even like resources, I think, or something like that, and like the types of words they use, you know.
Good. So jargon, for example. Yeah, if they're using medical jargon that you don't know what they're talking about they're probably writing to someone who knows what that is. If they're explaining even rudimentary things, they're probably writing to people who are not experts in the field.
I think looking at where it was published can give you an idea. Like my article for the first one was from the New England Journal of Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you an idea like what kind of people are going to be reading the New England Journal of Medicine. Probably doctors or people in the field of medicine. So. And
that's probably the biggest clue there is. Because no matter how, even if Dr. Seuss wrote a nice little story about, in his style and published it in New England Journal of Medicine, kids are not going to go find it there, are they? So, yeah, good. How else do you tell who the audience is?
No, they could even tell you.
Yes, they can. And they can tell you directly or indirectly. Say, therapists should understand that teenage girls, this, that, the other. Who are they talking to? They're probably talking to therapists because they're saying, like, this applies to you. How else do you tell?
Well, if you can, it's kind of related to purpose. If you know what their purpose is, like what action they want people to take, then obviously their audience would have to be someone who could take that action.
Yeah.
So again, that could rule out children, or like they could be talking to teachers or people who could act on whatever it is they want them to do.
Yeah, that's right. Now, some writers out there, just so you know, maybe they're not quite as well educated as you on writing and knowing that if you have a purpose in mind, you should write to people who could do something about it. So sometimes authors will write to people who can't do anything about it and say, policy claims, right? This is what we should do. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah. It's maybe not as effective for getting the job done, but it can be very important. That's what newspapers are. I mean, by the way, when you tell me who the audience of the paper is, do not claim it as the general public. Be more specific than that. But when you're talking to a newspaper, that's kind of close to the truth. It's the general public. Now, obviously, it's people who speak that language and people who can read and people who have some interest in current events, so you can narrow it down, but it's pretty general. But when you make your claim, if you choose to analyze audience, make it interesting. Be, like we talked about last time, be specific enough that it's interesting. This is written to doctors. Well, what kind of doctors? There are family practitioners, there's oncologists, there's OB/GYN, there's so many different kinds that one article probably doesn't apply to all of them. They're research doctors and all that. So be specific enough to be interesting. And then you could prove to me how you know, well, it was published here and it uses these words, just like we've been saying. And then tell me, when you tell me if it was successful or not, go ahead and also tell me how did they appeal to that. Maybe those are the same answers. They used words they understood. They didn't give too much background, but they already did.
So maybe that can be given like throughout, like as you give the evidence, also say like this is how I can tell the audience because this is who it would appeal to. Or
yeah, that'd be great. All right, the third thing you could analyze in this is you could do, I'll give you 6 of these by the way, significance. And by this, again, don't tell me about the significance of the topic or the content. Tell me how the authors created a sense of significance. You know, so tell me some ways how, when someone's writing about something and it's important, what are some methods they can use to make the reader feel like, oh yeah, this matters.
Well, giving background information or just basically stating the importance or the effects of not doing something.
Yeah, great. All three of those were really good answers. Statistics, oh wow, that's a lot of people. Numbers, a story. You know?
Emotionally charged words.
Yes. Now, sometimes this can lead to bias, by the way, so you can comment on that if you want. In fact, that's another one of your options this time. You can analyze bias. Was the author biased? How do you know? Prove it to me. And it's okay to not do binary thinking on this. You don't have to say, yeah, this article is really biased. You can say it had some bias and it had some good, fair, even-handed stuff. You can say on one hand it used these big emotional words. On the other hand, it showed both sides of the issue. You can, if the author was really biased or little, and you can even say there were some red flags that indicated possible bias. You don't have to take this hardcore stance. Yeah, they were biased because they said, what's a big emotionally charged word? Disaster. Disastrous. The last week has been, and all the scandals have been disastrous for the Obama administration. Oh, he's a disastrous, he's biased. Is that true?
Possibly.
Yeah, it's a red flag. It's like, oh, better watch to see what else, gather it all together. But if that's the only red flag you got the whole time, they're probably okay. So you can say that. You can say overall it wasn't biased, but there were a few red flags that, tripped my little warning signals as I read along and pointed out some of those like that. Another one you can do is, I've got two more. You can point out strategy that the authors use. Do you have any idea what I mean by strategy?
What means they use to get the reader on their side, maybe?
Great. Yeah. If you're persuasive in any form, you'd better be paying attention to get them on your side and not make them resist you. And that's this effectiveness thing. That's this whole rhetoric. And the more persuasive, the more you care about your audience reaction, the more you need to plan for that. And so what are some methods to get readers on your side?
Know your audience.
Good. And what does that mean? Or what do you do with that when you know your audience?
Think like, I don't know, I would just think the same way they were. It kind of like goes over that in chapter 3 where you have to I think they said make base their own arguments or something like that. I don't remember.
They used the word empathize in chapter 3, didn't they? Empathize with them, anticipate their reactions.
Exactly, that was the one, anticipate their reactions.
Yeah.
And I think that was what I was trying to say.
That's right, exactly. So if they're going to be bored, how can you fix that?
Put something interesting in there, catch their attention.
Good. And what kind of interesting things could you maybe put in? A joke. If you're casual enough, you can get away with that.
Maybe a story or
Yeah.
metaphors or statistics.
Or case studies, so it sounds more formal than a story if you want. Into good. A statistic, a paragraph break. Just make your paragraphs a little smaller. It makes it a little bit easier for them to read. Something that relates to them. Just show that it affects their life. So there are lots of strategies, and I'll give you a list of several. I won't give all to you, obviously. But so if you want to analyze that, say make your thesis claim your main claim, and say make it specific enough to be interesting, broad enough that you can support it in at least 3 ways again, and say they use the strategy of keeping it interesting for the readers. 1, they told the story. 2, they used this funny word. 3, they whatever else they did like that. And the last one is you can evaluate their arguments. What does that mean?
That'd be more like seeing if they're effective or if they have anything to do with the topic. they apply?
Yes, that could be part of it. So they're going down the paper and they're telling you these facts, making these claims, hopefully supporting them and sometimes having a warrant if needed. Do they apply to the main purpose of the paper? That's a great thing to look at. What else would you look at with arguments if you're evaluating them?
Sometimes people make claims that don't make sense, like this
Yeah.
caused this to happen, and it makes there's no connection between the two.
That's right, all that stuff you learned in chapter 2, was it? About 3, the types of claims. So they make a cause and effect claim. Okay, that was not chapter 3. And you think, does it make sense? Do they prove their point? Make a policy claim. Do they prove that point? Values. Do you agree with it, or is it just one-sided? etc. Yeah. So, and you can all that stuff you learned last time about good arguments. You know, make a claim, make it clear, make it interesting, support it enough. And I think I forgot to mention this last time. How much is enough? When you make a claim, how much support is enough? How do you know?
Ask your mom to read it.
Yes, mothers know everything. That's right. Okay, so going on. Wait, how else do you? What if your mom's not around, or she's busy baking cookies?
Email is hard.
There you go.
Well, sometimes it helps me if I read my paper out of order. I guess if that makes sense. Because if you read in order, sometimes you just kind of go with the flow and you're like, yeah, I wrote this, it's awesome.
Yeah.
And really, it's like, yeah, I could have done so much better. Sometimes if you read it like different paragraphs, especially if you're looking for something like that,
Yeah.
where you're not following the flow, you just pick something out and read it. Does it make sense on its own?
To kind of give you a fresh look at it. That makes sense. I've never heard of that technique. That's good. It's like incubating, where you read it, you let it sit for a day or two, you come back and read it again, and you find it. And another thing, did we mention this on day 1? Read it out loud, because these ears catch mistakes. The one in your head fixes things. Okay, your thoughts. But when something sounds funny, oh, you hear it. You want proof?
It happened in a peer review. I read it out
Yeah.
loud and I was like, oops, I forgot to put a there right there.
Yeah, good. Catch it. I mean, do you want proof? Did you read it out loud and that's how you caught it?
Yeah, well, our
Okay,
group,
good.
we each read them out loud, and I think both of us caught something in ours. We're like, oops, forgot a word. You
Okay.
know?
Good. That's good to hear. And you just saved yourselves from hearing me try to sing out of tune. So you'd be like, oh, yeah, we believe you. Our ears catch things.
You can still do that, that's okay.
Well, my comfort zone.
The camera's on, right?
Yes, it is. That's right. I'll be just forever. So we may come back to that. Hey, another thing I forgot to mention last time. Let me slip this in right now because it's a good moment. Remember how we were talking about different types of claims, and it's good to be aware of them so you know how to evaluate them? Well, I have an example. This I think is a really good example of that. So let's go with the immigration amnesty that we discussed a little bit a week or two ago. If they give me an example of a claim of value about amnesty for immigrants who have lived here for a while, legally.
Children of immigrants didn't intend to break the law.
Yeah, they're innocent. They moved here when they were 2, and this is the only home they've ever known. And we like kids, and we want to help them. We like people. Great, there's a good claim of value. Is that enough to base a policy on? No. It can give us some direction. It can say, we need to look at this. How about give me a claim of fact about amnesty for illegals? You could say how many there are. Like there are 4,000 in the state of Utah. I don't know how many there are.
I was going the wrong direction, sorry.
Okay. There are other types of claims of fact I'm sure you could do. But so it's information. Is that enough to base a policy on? Well, there are 2,000 of them. We better let them stay. That's too many people to bus. So, no, not enough information. How have a policy. We should give them amnesty or something. There's a claim. Is that making a claim of a policy? Is that enough? So what is enough to decide our policy on? What? Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. In fact, I was going to add in cause and effect. We need to know the whole big picture. What would the effect be? Some people who are against amnesty, they're like, no, it's just wrong. We have to do everything that is right and wrong. And if it's broken the law, it's wrong. And so we have to ship them all out because the law said so. So some people, that's a values thing, actually, isn't it? I meant to do some cause and effect. Some people who are against it say they'll take American jobs. Will they? I don't know. Because proponents say, well, they'll take a lot of jobs you don't want to do anyway. A lot of people say they'll take the jobs and they'll work for less, and that drives down the wage for other people. Okay, that's probably true in at least certain areas. But we need to figure out, how much, working, will they pay more taxes? Will they not have to go to emergency room
So what are the
because they're
requirements?
documented? Yeah, and we need to figure out exactly, we need to know every detail, like what are the impacts, what are the cause and effects, what's the whole big picture, and that's the only way a truly rational person can come to a conclusion on this. Because if you're basing all your decision just because you're like, oh, I feel bad for them, that's hard life not being able to get a job because you're undocumented. That's true, but you have to see the whole big picture. And then, is everyone going to come to the same conclusion once we see the whole big picture?
No.
Absolutely not. Why not?
Because everyone has their own opinion, and sometimes they'll stick to it.
Yeah.
Not
And-
willing to change, or they have opinions of their own that you didn't show.
Yeah. And they'll value different things. Well, it might have a danger of increasing some crime and some gangs moving up over the border, but that's a small case compared to all these people who will now can go to college and contribute and they're great people. We want a part of it. See, everyone's going to weigh these things. It's called values in conflict. And if you ever want to write a successful, persuasive paper, that's where you have, on one of these big, complicated issues, you have to aim there for the values in conflict. You have to either get them to decrease the values that are against, let's say this is your position, my left hand. You want them to choose this. You need to get them to value what you value more, or value what they value that's in conflict with you less. And one more comment there. The best place to usually start is start with common ground, because then you're anticipating your audience and say, yes, they're people, they're innocent kids, some things we all agree on. And then people start reading, they're like, yeah. But if you start right out with your thing that conflicts with their views,
Next.
yeah, resistance, right? So values in conflict is where the pivot happens. So just thought we'd talk about that. All right. Are all these 6 items fairly clear? Everyone think for just a second, think about which one you might want to analyze for your second rhetorical analysis paper. And while you do, I'll bring up this.
You're choosing a different article, right? Or
You can do the same article if you want. Yeah, either way is fine. You'll just be making a different claim about it. The claim might even be related. Maybe your last time you talked about logos, and this time you talk about arguments. You might have some things in common. Just, improve it, add a few new commentary. That's why I have 2 of this assignment, is primarily so to make sure that you get it down. Like, you know how to make a good thesis claim, you know how to add additional arguments that support that claim and make good articles. So there's a little bit of overlap in 2 big papers. That's not a big deal to me.
I had a question.
Yes.
They have this phrase they go on and on about called wallowing in complexity, and they encourage it. And I think what this textbook was talking about, avoiding binary thinking, is the same general idea that in the real world, most of the answers are not really cut and dry. And it's okay to be accurate. Because what if you get this article, like the one you just described, or that you referred to, and it was interesting sometimes and boring sometimes. If you take a stronger stance and say it was mostly boring and leave out the other side, then you're not giving an accurate representation of it, are you?
Well, yes, I feel like you are supposed to recognize the other side and counter arguments and address them, but you still should have, I guess in my mind, I feel like you should still have one clear view, like you're trying to,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think I see your point, because saying it that way, where you say it was interesting sometimes and boring sometimes, that does kind of make it sound like, well, why are you even telling me this?
Yeah, I
There's
feel
no
like
value
I should
in
have
it,
just
right?
picked like ethos or something different other than that if they didn't
Yeah.
really know which side to take.
I think what you heard him say that made you think that is he was saying, maybe one of your examples, you point out and say, this one, it's kind of a stretch, you can kind of be either way, but, you could be taken this way. So I don't think he necessarily meant write your whole paper on a wishy-washy topic, but maybe one paragraph, you could point something out that, maybe could be taken either way, but then to point out the way you took it was this way. Not necessarily like an entire paper, but I don't know.
Kevin, what do you think?
To me, it seems like it could almost be kind of a cop-out, though. Like,
Uh,
I mean, obviously, like, there's some where it's not, but, like, if you're like, the article was bad, but I guess it was good, too. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know, it doesn't seem like you're really taking a stand.
It's like, personally, I hate it, but bless his heart, it is, kind of thing.
Like, I see what you're saying, but also, like, if I read it, that's kind of what I would think. It's like, well,
Yeah.
you're not really taking a stance. You're just kind of...
I felt it was a cop-out too. The example that I read online,
Yeah.
the jelly bean analogy in the opening.
I forget, what was it about?
He says like, this article was like eating jelly beans. Like you get some really good flavors you like, but you also get these really
Right.
crappy ones that you hate. And,
Which was a
like,
great metaphor, wasn't it?
yeah, it was an interesting metaphor to start with, but then I felt like it was like, so you couldn't come up with 3 arguments to support just one side, so you're gonna like try and do both. So
Yeah.
it seemed like a cop-out to me as I read it,
Okay.
so.
So here's gonna be my final answer, my preference on this is, I'm perfectly fine if you take what you guys call a wishy-washy thesis. But if you make a wishy-washy thesis, I want you to support it so well that I see enough examples in your explanations that I'm like, I get it. This was a wishy-washy article. Instead of, it had good and it had bad, and I read 3 little points, and I still have no idea what the article is really like. So if you make a wishy-washy claim, and then you prove it to me, and I'm like, I get it. That's an accurate representation of that paper, I believe you. Then I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't mind if you have that kind of complexity. Yeah.
I have a question about the last one you said, just evaluating their arguments.
Mhm.
So are you saying like you'd evaluate that they kind of offered a legitimate kind of like solution by the end, or they made an actual complex argument, other than just being like, they're kids, like let's be nice to them, but they actually kind of like dug into it more? Is that what you're saying?
That is one, so what you're kind of referring to is like the overall argument of the paper.
Yeah. Like,
And I'll have to think about that for a second, but what I was referring to was more like what you're being graded on for the rhetorical analysis. If they make a claim, do they support it?
okay.
Did they explain it well enough? Or did they make these claims, assume everybody is on board and agree with them, and then move on to the next claim? I remember I had one particular textbook when I was getting my bachelor's in a sociology class or something like that. Gender roles, something like that. And in chapter 1, in the introduction, it made this really far out, unsubstantiated claim. I remember it even, it was that Abraham Lincoln was probably gay because his wife wasn't very attractive. I'm just kidding, I think that's true. They said because when he was in college, he shared a bed with some other student or something. Okay, now, I think that's a way far out claim to make, because I don't think people were so homophobic back then, and we didn't have as many beds. We were so sensitive to that kind of stuff. And there probably people shared beds. It was a more common thing, So if that happened in the world today, that'd be much more of a sign, not many people would do that. If you're not your sibling or something like that, it's, look down on them, whatever. So they made one claim that I thought was kind of a reach. Not a huge deal, but as I remember, they then made 3 or 4 more claims building on top of that shaky foundation. And being in chapter 1, it made me very skeptical of them for the whole book. So I read the whole book watching for other kind of weak claims. Well, there wasn't anymore. It was good. It was fine. But it made me resistant kind of as a reader. So that's a little more what I'm asking, what I had in mind thinking of is like say, they did a great job with claims. Let me give you an example. They claimed this and they gave all this evidence and quoted this expert, et cetera, et cetera. If you want, you can contradict yourself. There was this one that wasn't so good. It's like making a concession, which builds your ethos, right? And it makes me feel like, I got the whole picture now. You explained it very, very thoroughly. So that's what I'm looking for. In fact, I think what you're referring to, I think that would fit well with purpose. That would fit in well with purpose overall. Yeah. Okay, any other questions on that? Then let's take a look at a few examples. And got a couple articles and stuff to look at. And we'll read a little bit of them, and then we'll practice analyzing these 6 different aspects and make sure you're perfectly clear on it. So here's one from Politico. Do striking teachers think of kids? And this is from way back at least a year ago, maybe 2. Yeah, 2 years ago. Do you remember, what was the state, Minnesota or something? They say so, I think. Wisconsin, when all the teachers went on strike. And there's the whole governor thing and all that. So let's read a little bit of Robert's article here, a little bigger. And we'll critique. The United States has been a world leader for more than 2 centuries, and one reason has been the high priority we placed on education and educating young students. But what message do we send boys and girls, our future doctors, lawyers, bankers, and police officers, when thousands of adults march in the streets of Madison, Wisconsin, and elsewhere with little regard for what happens to the students? In recent days, Wisconsin teachers have skipped school to protest at the state capitol and got a sick note as a reward. Districts throughout Wisconsin had to cancel school, leaving students abandoned and parents scratching their heads. The implication is that it's more important to fight for pensions, health benefits, and collective bargaining than it is to teach children to read and write. Educating children was not even on the agenda for tens of thousands of screaming adults waving signs at TV news cameras. Their paychecks, vacation time, and other benefits were more important. It was like the kids never crossed their minds. Now this virus is spreading to Columbus. Okay, what is the purpose of this article? Based on what little we read of it.
To make people believe that teachers don't care for puppies.
Uh-huh. And what else? To protest the protesters, sort of, right? To say they should go back to school and work this out in PTA meetings or something reasonable, maybe. Okay, good. How do you know that? Prove to me that that's the purpose.
And elsewhere with little regards what happens to the students.
Okay, so in fact, instead of talking purpose, let's talk about the most obvious one. What do you think is the most obvious of these 6 options in here? Purpose, audience, significance, bias, strategy, or arguments? Bias, that's right. I have folders in my browser where I save, like, here's all the bias news articles, here's all the ones on education, here's all the, and this came out of one of those folders. Read down from the top and find me the first indication of bias. First paragraph, any bias there? U.S. world leader, high priority on education and educating young students.
It's kind of them like starting on common ground kind of a little bit.
Yeah, and that's like, what kind of claim is that? Value, policy, fact, cause and effect? Fact, yeah. Do we all accept that? Do we think, yeah, that sounds reasonable? Okay, so yeah, that's good. Yeah, so there's only potential bias you wouldn't catch if you're just starting to read this article. But this last part, and it, place on education and educating young students. Oh, young students, like puppies. Oh, my heart, right? So they're starting to get us to think about children, but you probably wouldn't catch that just starting at this point. Okay, paragraph 2. Any signs of bias there?
I got the last one, but I'm pretty sure I'm missing a lot. Like, where it says, with little regard for what happens to the students.
Yeah.
But is there one before that?
There's a hint of another one. So what are we saying? Boys and girls, our future doctors, lawyers, the pride of and joy, apple of our eyes, spark of my life, right?
Future teachers.
Yeah. So it's it's building the significance of this up. And significance usually has to do with pathos. It can be logos too, but. So that's a more subtle one. But the one you point out, that's pretty strong. With little regard for the students. What kind of claim is that?
Claim the teachers don't care.
Value.
Oh, I
Is
get
that, hold on.
Yeah. Definitely overlap. Because there's value related to that. But there's not talking about value, it's just values related. It's not super important to always be able to distinguish exactly which one. I'm going to say this is a fact. Claim of fact. They don't care. Teachers don't care about students.
Is that a fact of the writer?
Yes.
That he should, okay, because we don't know that.
Yeah, exactly. A
Fact
claim of
is
fact.
still a
Yes,
fact.
not a true fact necessarily, but a claim of fact. The writer says, Robert here says, they did this without regard for what happens to the students. Now, is that claim, which is a little bit incendiary, is that supported? Does he support that fact?
Well, kind of, I guess. He claims that they're more worried about their pension and vacation time.
Okay, so he backs it up with more of his opinion. Is that a good enough support? No, he gives a little bit more detail in it, and there is some truth to it, but is it enough to establish that as a fact that teachers don't care? And I know I'm expressing it more strongly than he actually said it. He said, with little, they're striking with little regard. I'm saying teachers don't care. He's not actually saying that, but they don't care as much as their pension.
That's still part of the claim,
Which?
where he's saying that it's more important to fight for pensions, health, benefits, and
as
coverage.
far as evidence.
That's the evidence of the claim. Well,
I think so. It's another claim. It's related to this one. So if his thesis is teachers don't care enough about students, then this would be one example. They're fighting for their pensions instead of teaching math and reading, which is another manipulative. Teaching children to read and write. Oh, the basic education. I imagine all these children in log cabins somewhere, with oil lamps, the 3 R's.
The word abandoned, that's,
Yeah. Leaving students and abandoned, there's a strong emotional word, and parents scratching their heads, wondering what's going on.
they've already given you images of like 5-year-olds dressed in a little doctor's outfit or something.
Yes, for Halloween.
All alone.
They're like, oh, look at a cute
Well,
little
that's
doctor.
like, and got a sick note as a reward. So it's, they're making it seem like, they're excited about this, like they were rewarded for skipping your kid's class or something.
Yeah, a little bit of sarcasm, a little bit of snarky there, right? So bias is pretty evident. So here's how you'd frame that in your rhetorical analysis too. You'd say there were many indications of bias in this, or the article was written in biased form, and that could be your thesis. And you say the first, indications of possible bias, came in the first 2, paragraphs. There was this one and this one. subtle hints that the first-time reader probably wouldn't catch, but as the bias grows, it becomes more apparent. For example, then he says they don't care about this, etc. He never takes the other side. He just blames the teachers. He doesn't adjust for the complexity of the issue. Like, you know what? They're teachers. They've been making $30,000 to teach your children, 40 kids in their classroom, long hours, low pay, not very much support, no prestige. Well, kind of prestige, but not really. Well, different kinds. You think they don't care about kids? Of course they do. But do you think they should all just not care about their pensions either? So anyway, it doesn't show the other side kind of stuff. So give, make one of those claims at a time, give some, a little quote or something, and explain there's an argument, then show another way. He used the incendiary words, the emotional words. He doesn't look at their side. These are different types of evidence that you could do to prove that. Yes?
I was gonna say, can the emotionally charged words be used as a claim for the bias, but you just did that.
Yeah. Yes, definitely can. Virus, see the virus is spreading. There's another one of those emotional words. Kind of things. Should we look? Let's briefly discuss these other ones. Who's the audience for this article?
Probably parents of some of these kids.
And adults and voters, and I'm gonna say Politico. Who reads that? You can guess, at least from the name, people who are interested in politics. And some of them will be legislators, but a lot of people will just be people with Facebook accounts who will maybe talk to the legislator.
Or he or she, whoever it is, set this up, I think a legislator would read this and laugh. You know what I mean?
Because you're like, that's so unsophisticated.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
I think you hold legislators in high regard. That's great.
Well, I don't know
I'm not
any,
saying they're dumb.
but some of them,
Yeah.
if they have half a brain, are gonna look at this and,
Oversimplified.
yeah, and so I think,
Binary.
and everything is really easy to read, it's pretty darn short, so it's like, get their attention, get them to read the article and move on. So it's like, it's probably for someone who just has a minute to read it, or glimpses at it.
Good
So
point, which is
parents
common for
or-
newspapers and
Yeah,
stuff. So
or-
that would be a great point to make if you were talking about audience. Good. What about this? Is he writing to people who support the teacher strike?
No.
He's not. If he is, he's doing a terrible job of trying to persuade them, not by creating this conflict. Is he writing to people who agree with him already?
Yeah.
Probably they'll read it and go like, right on, Robert, you rule. What about the people in the middle who are undecided? Is he writing to them?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be.
Fall under the umbrella.
It's not the most helpful article for them. It's not like balanced, unbiased, but it could be trying to sway a few people to his side. How about significance? Did he do a good job of building significance about the topic?
I think in that second paragraph, when he refers to the children that the strike is affecting as the future,
Doctors.
leaders and things, that showing the significance that these strikes are going to have on our future. We're trying to show that.
Yes, good. And I think what you just said, I think that was you, Marilyn, is how I'd say it, is he strives to establish significance. Now his bias undercuts it so much, but he does lots of things to do that. He says future doctors, he uses those emotional words, abandoned parents, scratching their heads, kids never cross their mind. So he's trying to make it sound really emotional and stuff. Okay.
Is emotional the same as important? Or
It's one form of it, yeah. It's like, makes you feel strongly about it, so that's significance. What are some ways he could have, that I don't really see in there very much, he could have created some logical significance? How many teachers were there? How many days did they miss?
Or how they have to deal with violence in their classroom choice. He doesn't specify anything that like they should get a little more person besides teaching the
Okay, so if he was showing the other side, he could talk about why teachers deserve Hawaiian vacations or whatever. Yeah, great. How about strategy? What's a strategy Robert uses here?
I think they're trying to anger you almost,
Yeah,
just trying to get a reaction.
good. And so all these things we've been discussing, the bias, the strong emotional words, the strategy, those are strategies to make you feel something and react and see the significance. What other strategies does he use? He starts out by focusing on the children, the poor children who don't know how to read and write anymore because they missed 3 days of school. Whatever.
And then he goes on to those evil teachers.
Yeah, so establishing blame or something like that. So maybe, what could our overarching thesis statement be if we were going to analyze strategy in this? What's a claim that kind of can use all these other ones we just come up with to fall under its umbrella?
Maybe like the outline, the way he started off with common ground, and then amplifying the importance of children and how they are the future, and then totally going to the topic or negatives and how it might destroy that future.
So that's a good list of
Is that like-
different things he's done. Is there one common thread that runs between all of those that we could use as our main thesis statement, and then these would all relate back to it? In other words, you gave us the
What is
specifics,
that
right?
that I'm saying? Is that just like an outline, or is that?
Maybe
Oh, I
it's
see.
the main
If-
statement.
Yeah, so what you did was you kind of put all those into one statement, and logically kind of that would work, but if you can, and then you go down and show the details, but if you can boil it down to one strategy, that's what I should ask. What's one phrase strategy that would describe all these things?
The author tried to use children and empathy to reach his audience.
Great. And pathos and stuff, right? So you could say the author was a pathetic advocate for the children. Play on words. A passionate advocate for children, using them as pawns in his argument against the teacher. Or however, that's a bias statement in itself. So however you want to say it, maybe it's accurate, but still, yes. And then you can show all the ways he used pathos to generate support for his claim. Good. Should we look at another example? All right, let's. I've got one more that was kind of similar. Let's take a look at the start of this one. It's just different enough we can discuss strategy a little bit more clearly in this one. So here we are, Washington Post. How those spoiled millennials will make the workplace better for everyone. That was last summer. Have you heard the one about the kid who got his mom to call his boss and ask for a raise? Or how about the college student who quit her summer internship because it forbade Facebook in the office? Yep, we're talking about Generation Y, loosely defined as those born between 1982 and 1999, also known as millennials. Perhaps you know them by their other media-generated nicknames. Teacup kids for their supposed emotional fragility. Boomerang kids who always wind up back home. Trophy kids. Everyone's a winner. The Peter Pan generation who will never grow up. How many of you are millennials? How are you feeling right now? Feeling...
I think it's kind of funny.
Good. She does a good job of it, right? Yeah. I think this is a she. Let me make sure. Is that right? Yeah, Emily. So even though she's kind of dissing on you,
she did it in a way that was like, that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's like, oh,
yeah,
teacup. I haven't
that.
heard that. Yeah, it is true.
But it totally doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
I have friends like that.
Yeah, I can think of like 15 people that fall into those categories.
Yeah.
So I like how in our other class, some people got really offended.
Uh-huh.
Were mad at this author.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, yes.
Probably
let's
because I
read
fit
on
the
and find out.
category.
Yeah.
It's true, it is. I'm not sure, so I'm wondering, like.
So were you the one who moved back home, or were you the one who quit? Like, which one offended you specifically?
Yeah, good point. Let's read on and see if you think it's still funny after another paragraph or two.
Okay.
Now this pampered, overpraised, relentlessly self-confident generation at age 30, I consider myself a sort of older sister to them, is flooding the workplace. They'll make up 75% of the American workforce by 2025, and they're trying to change everything. Are you okay now that she called you pampered? Overpraised? Oh, don't let it hurt your feelings. You're all wonderful.
That's a very big generalization.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
it
such
is.
a generalization that I think it's hard to take that personally.
Yeah.
Which is the only way that I would ever be offended if I felt like it was personally an attack on me. So
Good. And if your whole identity and ego is wrapped around, like, I'm a young, happening dude, cool dude, you know, whatever, then maybe this would attack, but hopefully you have identity based in many more things than just that. These are the kids, after all, who will text their dads for meetings. They think business casual includes skinny jeans, and they expect the company president to listen to their brilliant idea. Patience, are you still okay?
Yeah.
Okay. When will they adapt? They won't, ever. Instead, through their sense of entitlement and inflated self-esteem, they'll make the modern workplace adapt to them, and we should thank them for it.
There you go.
Yeah, see, come around. Because the modern workplace frankly stinks, and the changes wrought by Gen Y will be good for everybody. Few developed countries demand as much from their workers as the United States. Americans spend more time in the office than citizens of most other developed nations. Annually, we work 408 hours more than the Dutch, 374 hours more than the Germans, and 311 hours more than the French. We even work 59 hours more than the stereotypically nose-to-the-grindstone Japanese. Though women make up half of the American workforce, the United States is the only country in the developed world without guaranteed paid maternity leave. All this hard work is done for less and less reward. Wages have been stagnant for it, and on and on. So she comes out. Who's her audience? Is she writing to Gen Y or
I
not?
think it's people who are in the workforce, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, and
Older than Gen Y?
yeah.
Maybe
Like,
it's-
accept
that
it.
we're coming in on.
Yeah. Because then when she starts out complaining, oh, these pampered brats.
Like,
they're
yeah, they
like,
suck.
I know, like Jessica is always photocopying her, whatever, you know, whatever.
Maybe she works
They
too
can
much.
relate, yeah. You're right.
I'm like, why
Yeah,
is this
relax, go
bothering me so
home,
much?
watch a movie on
Yeah.
Netflix. Yeah, so maybe do you think that was Emily's strategy, was to get them on board, like, yeah, down with the kids? Kind of the opposite of our last author, huh?
Maybe she was just trying to start off with saying, this is what I hear all the time, because a lot of people
Yeah.
are complaining about Generation Y, when this is what's gonna happen, and this is how it's gonna shift
Yeah.
to the Gen Y.
Maybe so. You know, we can't know Emily's reasonings for this, but we can know the effects. Here's another possible reason. By describing the millennials, you have to do that before it makes sense to say they're going to change the workplace. So logically, one idea builds to the next. Maybe that's why she did it. Maybe all the above.
Well, she also showed almost like both sides, because she
Uh-huh.
did point out what people would think of negative things, you know,
Uh-huh.
or quitting because they can't use Facebook or something like that. And so it wasn't like she was just praised Generation Y,
Yeah.
you know. So she kind of gave herself a little bit of ground there.
Good.
I think
And-
it gives her more credibility later when she says, well, you're going to be thanking them, or you should thank them, because now she's already given to the other side
Right.
and shown, you know, the negatives and the stereotypes in that sense. And
Right.
then now when she talks about the positives, she'll be more even-sided. Like, it kind of, even though it seemed really biased from the get-go, I think overall it makes it seem less biased as you continue.
Yeah, it balances out. In fact, if she had not said some Gen Y are spoiled brats, then if she started out saying Gen Y will change your workplace for the better, a lot of readers would be like, whatever, I don't want to be in that workforce where people Facebook all the time. But so by getting out of the way, now she's free to say her other opinion and kind of clear the ground. Because people aren't saying, oh, how early.
Okay, guys, he just wanted to leave the room because he's really sensitive about this. I'm just kidding. Okay, guys, do you want to read it or do you want me to? I'll read it then. Some refer to the trend in higher education instruction as one that undermines academic excellence. Others see it as a way out of the financial squeeze on colleges and universities and as a way to bring professional expertise into the classroom. The debate centers on the effect of the growing number of part-time faculty on students and the effects of a system of benign neglect on the part-time teachers. How do programs of journalism and mass communication fit into the picture? Historically, professionals taught specialized courses, particularly introductory editing and reporting classes. Although the number of news editorial majors is in decline, adjuncts now also teach in growth areas such as graphics, public relations, and advertising. Is the use of adjuncts in journalism education prompted primarily by the needs for special expertise or motivated by the desire to cover more classes for less money, as some say is the case in higher education? Part-time teachers now fill positions vacated by full-time faculty or step into slots created especially for adjuncts in many disciplines at both four-year and junior colleges, partly in response to tougher economic times. Stop. What's the claim? That's the question, right? Anyone? Manuel, what's the claim? I just read for you. Is there a point? Did anyone feel like, yeah, stick it to the university?
Well, they pose a question in the fourth paragraph in the beginning. Is the use of adjuncts in journalism education prompted by the need for expertise or because they want to save money?
What do you think?
That's kind of what they addressed, I guess.
Did anything else in this prove to you, how did they feel or anything like that, you know? Because they asked the question, I know we didn't read all of it, obviously, but, you know, here at UVU, we're the largest university. You know, we're beating out UVU, or BYU, we're beating out the U, we're the largest, but we have a lot of adjuncts. So it's if we're the largest, open enrollment, anyone can come here, you think we have a little bit more money than some people who are, BYU might go open enrollment because of this new missionary thing, you know, they're gonna have less enrollment. So how does that, you know, what are they saying?
That whole issue reminds me of these temporary work services. I've worked with guys for years that worked side by side with me that were making half what I was because they were working through a temporary company.
Because the temp's taking part of their wages.
Yeah, they don't have to pay insurance, they don't have to, it's just how business is going now. It's how they're saving money.
Yeah. So, now we won't, this isn't psychology, so we won't go into whether we think that's okay or not. But what would this fall under? Is this a fact? Is this significance? Is this, you know, what are those 6 things?
I'd say fact.
Fact?
Claim of
A
fact.
claim of fact? They're saving money. Yeah. But then again, he said a lot of things that I thought could fall under 3 categories. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that's right. Okay. Now, how does he? I know we didn't read a whole lot. My voice is not all the way there, but you know, what was brought up that might back that up? Was there anything that we read that backed up? How about this? Part-time teachers now fill positions vacated by full-time faculty or step into slots created especially for adjuncts. So now it's not just, let's have them come in and step in because Susie left because she was pregnant or whatever. It's now they're creating it specifically for that. Doesn't that kind of give you the feeling that they are trying to save money? It's not, are they trying to save money or that? To me, it sounds like if they're creating especially specifically for that, they are saving money. That's their goal. Does anyone else get that impression?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we can read on a little bit and see if we have more insight. Estimates of, oh, here's some numbers. Yay. So now this is a claim of statistics. What happened? Estimates of adjuncts used throughout all of higher education range from 38% to 57%. In community colleges, they account for 67% of all faculty. Even before the most recent financial crisis in higher education, researchers who looked at the use of adjuncts in community colleges found that 2 new part-time positions were created for every new full-time position in an 8-year period. Women and minorities make up the majority of the ranks of this growing army of adjuncts in all institutions. Because the part-time pool is large, many institutions enjoy a buyer's market in which they can pay low wages and offer few, if any, other benefits. That kind of goes along with what you were saying with the temp agencies. You know, pay them less, no benefits, and they're willing to do it. The result is a sizable portion of faculty in higher education who teach many of the required classes but have only tangential, thank you, connections to the institution. Left unanswered are questions about what, if anything, schools are doing to orient these teachers to teaching and whether adjunct classroom performance is monitored and evaluated. Now they're bringing up a whole new thing, that last sentence. Whether adjunct classroom performance is monitored and evaluated. So now they're almost claiming that they're trying to save money, and now they're saving money and they don't even care who they hire. Did you pick that up? Do you feel the same, or does someone take it differently?
I
Yeah.
feel like you are really good at this.
Thanks. I don't know if I am doing the right thing, but there you go. Well, and also, like, it kind of made me think right when in the paragraph, women and minorities make up the majority of the ranks of this growing army. And then later it goes, you know, because it's saying they can pay low wages and offer few, if any, other benefits. That kind of pisses me off. It says women. I'm not a feminist or anything. Like, I'm not super, you know, like, whatever, equal rights, I don't care. But at the same time, it's like, now they're making it seem like us women are like, we need to go back to work. Pay me nothing and I will do it. It's like, no. I want more money, just like the next person, you know? And then also, how do you feel as an adjunct teacher when they say they're not even monitoring you? Do you even have a degree in this?
Yes, I do.
No, I'm not. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
And I like not being monitored. I mean, I like doing my thing, but I think it's important to monitor other adjuncts. Make sure you have some quality. There are different ways to test it. So.
yeah, not necessarily, yeah, I agree with you. Who wants the person sitting in the back the entire time saying, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that and you had racial discrimination or what was it in that essay? Sexual,
Harassment?
What?
Sexual harassment?
No, what was that one, that example of the book that we talked about the other day, where it was boys and girls, what was that called?
Gender bias.
Gender bias, you know? Yes.
But they can't have them monitoring because then they might as well be teaching the class.
Well, yeah,
They're watching the whole time.
and I agree to that.
You gotta pay them probably more than the adjunct.
More than that.
But at the same time, it also kind of makes it seem like, well, at least to me, I'm going into teaching, but I'm going to teach your children. I'll be striking for pensions one day. But
You don't care. How dare you?
I hate your children. Give me money. Like, it's like if I wanted money, I would go into a different field. Okay. But anyway, but to me, when it says they're not even, you know, I might be over emphasizing it, but adjuncts classroom performance or doing these orient things, their performance is monitored and evaluated, or not monitored and evaluated. And to me, that kind of gives it just a slight lean towards, you know, they might not even be that qualified. Do you know what I mean? Maybe not that they're sitting in the classroom monitoring you, but what was the hiring process like?
Well, what do they care as long as they're getting you cheap?
Exactly. So.
Let me ask you, since I just came in and didn't get to hear that paragraph, will you make that rhetorical claim, or is it just bring up that question?
I think that would be, I don't know if there's enough in there from what we've read so far to have that as my main claim, but I think it could fall under another claim.
Okay. As a possibility, like they brought it up, you don't know if they're suggesting that or just reporting the facts.
Yeah.
The facts themselves might suggest
Yeah,
that.
because there's nothing in there that says, because it says women and minorities make up the majority of the ranks of this growing army of adjuncts in all institutions. How do I know that?
You have to read
10.
footnote
10.
10.
I'm not going to.
They are stating it overall, like they're not using a lot of emotionally charged things. I feel like they're trying to state things very factual, but it's pretty clear, especially like by the end of that second column, that they're focusing on like the negative aspect
Adjuncts.
of adjuncts and that there's too many and they're just doing it to cut costs. Like that's the.
So it's not, I don't even know if this is necessarily about adjuncts as it is about universities and community colleges charging you a bunch of tuition and cutting their own overhead. You know, so it's not, and like you just said, you know, it might not necessarily be about the adjuncts themselves, it's about universities and how they're cutting corners. So now that we've read on a little bit, does anyone have a claim? Like a new claim? I know we talked about a lot, but anything else that?
If you're going to analyze this paper, what aspect would you choose to analyze? Purpose, audience, strategy, significance, bias, arguments? You know?
Maybe purpose. Like, you know the purpose, but you can probably go into
Anybody else?
I like the significance.
Yeah.
Where is this headed?
Yeah. How have they built significance so far, or failed to do so? You can analyze either way. Did you talk about that?
a little bit. But I guess I don't pose the questions that I use because I don't know what I'm doing. Do you want to take over?
Not really. I don't get paid enough to do that.
Hey, I'm
You're
paying to
honored.
be here. Well, I think Lane was going somewhere. I don't know if he'll say it, but well, how you just asked, what are things that we do about your name's Lane? Please tell me his name.
I can't hear you.
Did I call you by the right name? Lane.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, there we go. But I think like how you're saying, what are some things to back it up? You know,
Well, like I said, it's not like this is a unique thing. This
No.
is going on everywhere. This is,
exactly.
Everybody's
It's
saying
been happening, it's happening everywhere, and I guess for a while, it's just that not everybody's aware of it. I mean, I don't think that everybody realizes that the person teaching you is not full-time, or doesn't have an office, or does, you know, is adjunct, or anything like that. So I think it's more of also like, hey, did you know this? And did you know that this is happening? So I think it's the purpose, the paper has a purpose of informing people and letting them know what's going on. And it's got a great, like at least in that paragraph where it says estimates of adjuncts used throughout all of higher education range from, and then it gives you percentages and from universities and colleges. It's giving it its significance.
Oh yeah. Well, and then those numbers kind of help.
Wow, this is how much it
help
is, in
something.
case you didn't know, so.
Is there anything in here that you think that they could have touched on, or that didn't help their claim?
when I read articles like this, I just wondered, well, what's your plan? What's
Like,
your,
what are we gonna do about it?
what's your solution here?
Like, are you just doing this to remind me and piss me off?
Yeah.
Doesn't it feel like we're kind of still in the introduction where they're talking in generals?
Yeah.
It looks like this is a very long article,
Yeah.
but, oh, hello.
Just touch the trackpad, it should pick up. Sorry, I'm like,
What's a track?
On the laptop.
Yeah, I'm not a techie person.
sorry, not the touchpad. By the
Yeah,
way, audience, did you guys pick out the clue about audience? On the left column there?
would it be students? Maybe, well, maybe.
It could be broad, I mean, it could be faculty and students and university administrators. It could be kind of broad. Can you narrow it down? Are there any clues that it's, even though it appeals to everyone, that's the classic error when you talk about audience, when you analyze audience. You're like, it talks about gun control, so it's obviously written to people with guns. Well, it applies to them, but that doesn't mean it's written to them, tailored for them, anticipating their concerns, everything. So on this one, on the middle of the left column, it gives a clue as to who an audience might be.
Although the number of new editorial
The
majors.
people in journalism and
Yeah, I mean, why, I'm not clear why they even asked that question. How does it apply to journalism and mass communications? Why are they even asking that unless they're gonna address them specifically, you know? Why not say, how does this apply to people in biology? So that's a clue, and if we read on, maybe we'll find out that's true.
They
The
mentioned-
title, the abstract sure don't sound like it, but
Yeah, they mentioned journalism more than once too, and I had that thought too. I was like, where did the journalism thing come from all of a sudden? So that would make sense.
Yeah, and then it
Yeah.
brings up, adjuncts now also teach in growth areas such as graphics, public relations, and advertising. So maybe though, that's kind of like a, you know, a kick to them or something. Because they're kind of sub-note.
because their stats all seem general across the board adjunct, but they're finding some specific application for these journalists. majors.
Well, and I like how Lane put it earlier, because this article, it's like, how is this any different from construction? You know, because you could do the same thing like you're saying with, you know, SOS or Spherion or, you know, all those Nexio, all those staffing places that'll fund places like Stouffer's or Nature's Sunshine or construction jobs or whatever. It's like, you know, they might not be like adjunct, they might not have that title, but they're temps, you know, they're the same type of category. So I think the significance, I don't know if the significance is necessarily for adjuncts for me as it is for, it's kind of more of a broad, it can carry over into other careers. So I don't know, for me, reading this, I don't know, like you said, like what is it, like what are we gonna do about it? But, you know, adjuncts, I have no problem being taught by an adjunct. If they're trying, if the university's trying to save money, as long as my teacher can help me. You know, if I learn and grow and I'm learning the correct things. For me, it doesn't matter, but it's something like this could be carried over into other things, so I don't know if that even matters. I don't know if I said that, but.
Have we had enough on this article? Okay. Thanks for filling me in, Chelsea. Are you perfectly clear on rhetorical analysis 2 as well? Anybody who's less than 80% clear?
If you are, it's probably my fault.
We make that rhetorical claim. I just repeated myself for the 5th time. That's what again. Okay, if as you read this paper, if you realize you are not clear, and like read the assignment description and everything, if that doesn't clear it up, feel free to email me. I'll be glad to give you a little feedback and make sure you get clear. Choosing between a few options here. Do you want to look at some examples of the rhetorical analysis again? Or have we really done plenty of that? Because I have some other interesting skills I can start teaching you today as well. Okay, want that? We'll do that. Let me then, to introduce some of these new skills, I'm going to read you some of the book that is responsible actually for the way I'm teaching this class, the Writing for Social Change, where you're writing to a narrow audience, where you're applying all this rhetoric and audience awareness and anticipation that we're talking about, and it's going to make you really good writers. I think I briefly told you the story on day 1 about the Writing for Social Change conference we held here last fall. And this is the book, this is the guy, Chip Ward, he lives in Tooele actually, who came as our keynote speaker. And we chose him really because, well, he's local, that's convenient, but because he wrote this book, Canaries on the Rim. and it's all about, he moved out here to the west, into Utah, to Tooele, and there's all this, all the dioxins and poisoning is going on, and it's, a lot of people are getting sick because of it, but it still is allowed to go on because somebody's making money and they influence the government. And so there's all these problems, but he points out, and I know I quoted this to you before, he points out that there are all these important causes, and there are all these people who do research and have this great, really important, significant data, but they're so steeped in academic writing that no one can read it, or no one will read it. And so it doesn't do any good. He says you have to write it different to get out. So I want to read you a little bit of this book, Canaries on the Rim. And this is kind of like a research paper that talks about all this stuff, but it's written in a way that it becomes accessible. He talked also a lot about, like, when you're talking to the press, you can't have, he was at some press conference and the scientist dude was up giving all this bit of explanation about these big problems, and he noticed the news crews just kind of turn their cameras off. They're like, we can't use this, because they need sound bites. That's one reason why our politicians sound so stupid and so binary thinking and stuff, because they have to have a sound bite that's quick and sounds good and that they'll play on the news. And maybe if they have good reasoning thoughts or that are more complex, take too long, they'll play them on the news, I don't know. But so he went up and stopped him. He says, let me put this in another way for you. And he summed up the story they were doing the press release news conference on. He's like, this is a story about how somebody got sick and somebody got rich. And that was well put, right? And the cameras, came back on and everything. And so it's all about being able to deliver to your audience in a way that will work. And that's what your final papers are all going to be about. So let me read you a little bit of this book and see if it, because your impression is not going to be that it's like a research paper kind of stuff. So I'm going to read you the introduction, and I'm going to read you a few snippets where I've annotated a bunch. Landing Under a Sleeping Rainbow, Part 1. A child of the East, I had never seen a desert. My eyes had been conditioned to see the beauty in the pastoral landscapes of Vermont, the rich forest green of the Adirondacks, and the classic alpine vistas of Switzerland. As I approached Capitol Reef across an open horizon of gray and treeless mesas, I was struck by the bare, unfinished, almost ruined qualities of the land. My God, I thought, this is the world's largest construction site. It was hot, and I remember how Factory Butte and Kingsville Mesa stood out as if they were all that were left of the surface of the planet after it was excavated. As we drove along, flat, cracked plains alternated with huge, graceful mounds of muted ash, elephantine evidence of ancient volcanic activity. Maybe it was the moon. I turned to my wife, Linda, and said, what the hell was Bill thinking? We were on our way to Capitol Reef National Park to visit Linda's brother, Bill Hawes, who had just landed a job as a seasonal ranger in the heart of Utah's vast complex of Red Rock Canyons. It was our first trip out west. We were headed for San Francisco to wear flowers in our hair. Although it was 1973 and the 60s had faded fast, we still regarded ourselves as hippies, 2 kids, just married, childless and eager to explore. We had vagabonded around Europe the year before, and the West was next. Bill had also lived in Europe, and we goes on and on. So far it sounds like a story, right? Just this big narrative. Well, it is, but it starts to pack in more and more information. And as he begins his narrative, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Kind of engaged. Why does that catch your interest?
It's giving me visual.
Yeah.
Almost like Siri, like a car and driving in the desert.
Flowers in your hair,
Flowers.
excavated the earth, all that stuff. Yeah, so those concrete visual, that's one of the skills I'm going to teach you about either today or next time, or in the future. Make it visual, and your brain has an easy time with concrete things like that. What else makes it engaging?
Reading a personal story.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, and you can relate to some things, going out, striking out what's new, their experience of landscape, yeah, road trip, all this kind of stuff, we kind of relate. Yeah, hippies, yeah. And as he goes on, he gets more, not just concrete visual experiences, but some abstract ideas that get really interesting as well. And he also starts to introduce the topic of ecology by describing the land and how it's beautiful. And part I just skipped, he talks about how you have to be in this canyon for a long time to really understand it, because in every time of day, every different angle of the sun, different weather conditions, whether it's wet or snow on it or dry, a little bit after a rain, it's always changing, and you have to get to know all that stuff. So he goes into quite a bit of detail about the land, and he does that to make you care about the land before he starts talking about people poisoning it. It gets you to involve. Here's a paragraph that I thought has a strategy in it. Southern Utah's first white settlers were sent down by Mormon leader Brigham Young to colonize the area and look for resources. They endured incredible scarcity and hardships in a land that could have not been more alien to those settlers from their English and Scandinavian pasts. Mormon polygamists, fleeing harsh federal laws against their newly adopted theology and lifestyle, also fled south where they hoped they could escape prosecution. Scarcity was also the rule for them, since they brought with them the scant resources of refugees. I often thought of these early white explorers and colonists and wondered what we held in common. Linda and I were also poor, starting out, and unfamiliar with this startling landscape that was so unlike our eastern environment. Did you catch the strategy in there? So he's from the East Coast, he's not a Mormon, certainly not a Mormon polygamist from way back then. How do a lot of people who are like outsiders to that group, how do they usually talk about them?
Not in the nicest terms.
Yeah, it can often be kind of derogatory or something like that, or like scoffing, whatever. Does he come across like that at all? No,
We
even
have
that.
in common.
Yeah, he's looking for that common ground thing. Now, who's his audience writing to people near the Tooele proving grounds and all that? Who's
Most likely LDS.
Yeah, a lot of them are going to be LDS because there's a lot of Mormons out in that area. So it's important that he didn't alienate them, isn't it? And so that was a good way to form some common ground. Do you think he planned that?
No, he probably actually did feel that.
Yeah, we can't know his mind, but I do know from meeting him and hearing him talk and all that he's really feels like a part of that community. He loves his neighbors. There are differences, but he's all good with community and stuff like that. So this is probably his natural, thing, whatever. But if you did think about it, that would have been a good strategy to him. Turns out that he's a good writer. Can you really tell? He's a really good writer, right? He doesn't like writing. It's just something he's just got to get done, but he happens to be really good at it. So with you too, you might not like writing, but if you care about what you're writing about, you want to accomplish something, if you care about your audience, this is the kind of stuff it leads you to. That's why your sense of purpose of whatever you're doing and your sense of audience, who you're trying to reach, those two things, they dictate everything you do, everything you say, your content, your style, your strategy, your organization, because you're thinking about what will keep their interest. This is going to upset them. How can I smooth that out? So if you care about what you're doing. Okay, let me read you just the end of this part one. Now I know I needed that. So they stayed for a while and the Sleeping Rainbows, like a little resort. Now I know I needed that time and place. The most important lessons of my life were learned there under the Sleeping Rainbow. These lessons became the lens for the next phase in my life as we moved to northern Utah and lived on the rim of another desert, the Great Basin, where we raised our kids and made our modest careers. We inadvertently moved from the grandest wilderness area in the contiguous United States to the most extensive environmental sacrifice zone in the nation. In an odd twist of fate, lessons learned living in the wilderness gave me the insight and resolve I needed when I found myself on the rim of apocalyptic ecocide. The stark contrast of those experiences revealed to me how our bodies are grounded in ecosystems and how we all live downwind and downstream from one another. Those lessons make me understand how the collective decisions we make about what we allow into our air, water, and soil are translated into the flesh and blood and living daily experience. I also learned how the mythic West of our pop culture hides a shameful legacy of environmental abuse, toxic wastefulness, and betrayal.